Does any of this look familiar? This is the media that you see and hear from every day. The media influences what news you see, what voices are heard or silenced, what music and artists get airplay, and how genders and racial groups are portrayed. Do you know who owns all of this power? Big media. There are only 5 major corporations who are controlling almost everything about this. In only 30 years, we as America have gone from 50 to 5 major companies who control the media. This is what is called media consolidation, and it is bad news for us.
You see, in 1996, the United States deregulated ownership laws of mass media industry, which means that a single corporation could then own multiple sources of communication, where before they were very limited on what they could own, like only one television station and only one newspaper in a given market. Now it's a no-holds-barred free market, where the trend has been for bigger companies to buy smaller ones and become even larger. Today's conglomerate media companies form what media analysts call an oligopoly, where only a few of the major ones dominate the multimedia landscape. There may be more mainstream channels of information, but there are fewer owners and therefore fewer sources of influence. Huge media companies like Time Warner, News Corporation, Disney, or Viacom control or at least influence the information and entertainment you use in your daily life, and most people don't even realize it. So why should you care? Well, let's talk about democracy for a minute. If you want a healthy democracy, there has to be a system of journalism that does its job informing the populace. A journalism that actually plays its fourth estate government watchdog role and doesn't just pantomime politicians, but actually does some investigating and asks some questions. Oftentimes, news these conglomerates produce has most of those properties we call journalism stripped away. They focus more on celebrities and puff pieces or sensationalism or politically biased commentary because that's what's profitable. These businesses garner audiences to expose them to advertisements. That's what they do. These vertically integrated companies take advantage of promoting themselves from their very own multiple mediums. Imagine seeing an online ad on MySpace of a HarperCollins book by a Fox News TV and radio personality that gets rave reviews in the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal and is the basis of an upcoming made-for-TV movie on FX. This example of internal self-promotion is one reason they own all that stuff. The combinations and advantages of owning these various popular mediums are endless, and the influence of ownership is apparent, whether it's Disney's family values or News Corporation's conservative editorials.
For the last 25 years, there's been a steep decline in media ownership, as you can see with this chart. I'm going to start with the Telecommunications Act of 1996. This law was claimed to foster competition. Instead, it continued policies of consolidation begun by Reagan, whose action reduced the number of major media companies from around 50 in 1983 to 10 in 1996. Since that law has been in place, the number has further reduced from 10 in 1996 to the 6 multinational corporations we have now. It was signed into law by the former chairman of the Democratic Leadership Council, mostly called by its acronym, the DLC. You might recognize him here. DLC members vote with the Republicans when promoting their pro-corporate agendas, which is most often over the good of the people. So the numbers may not be as good as they appear.
The year is 1917, and Representative Oscar Callaway enters a disturbing statement into the U.S. congressional record. The statement reveals why J.P. Morgan interests hired 12 high-ranking news managers. The 12 were asked to determine the most influential newspapers in America. They were to figure out how many news organizations it would take to control generally the policy of the daily press of the United States. The 12 found it was only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers. An agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought, and an editor was placed at each paper to ensure that all published information was in keeping with the new policy. Soon, that policy would be defined by a front group formed by J.P. Morgan and his colleagues. In fact, Morgan's personal attorney was founding president of the organization, the Council on Foreign Relations. Today, the CFR maintains that its goal is to increase America's understanding of the world. However, the actual objective of this highly exclusive club is revealed by the rare admissions of the insiders themselves. In the early 60s, a Georgetown University professor collects information for a book favorable to the network of powerful men who founded the CFR. For 2 years, Professor Carroll Quigley is allowed to examine the confidential papers and secret records of this network. Quigley reveals that these men aim to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. In short, they seek total and quiet control of the entire world. And the CFR is their most visible conduit for carrying out that agenda. CFR members include America's wealthiest tycoons, as well as the highly placed elite in government, academic institutions, tax-exempt foundations, and the establishment media. Ruling Class Journalists, written by Richard Harwood, describes the CFR membership as the ruling establishment in the United States. The Washington Post article boasted that news reporters who are CFR members do not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the United States, they help make it. Who are these policymakers? Many of their faces are familiar. NBC's Tom Brokaw, CBS's Dan Rather, ABC's Barbara Walters, Jim Lehrer of PBS, William F. Buckley of National Review, media mogul Rupert Murdoch, owner of the giant multifaceted News Corporation. These media heavyweights, and many others like them, are members of the CFR. Powerful corporations are also invited to become members. At the close of the 20th century, CFR influence presided over far-reaching consolidations of media control. In 1995, CFR members Michael Eisner of Disney and ABC's Thomas Murphy merged their media empires. Soon after the merger, the Disney-ABC empire becomes a CFR corporate member. In the year 2000, the world's largest internet service provider, America Online, joins forces with Time Warner, one of the world's largest news organizations. The CEOs favoring the move are CNN's Thomas Johnson and Time Warner's Gerald Levin, both CFR members. Once again, another media giant is created under the shadow of CFR influence. Today, an elite handful of individuals define the agendas that are supported by the empire of establishment news.
When the big media is in control, local, independent, and minority owners are pushed out of the market, and their viewpoints are no longer heard. That means less coverage of local issues that matter to your community, less unbiased, critical journalism, and less diversity.
You've got Scrubs on NBC in season 7.5, with the antics of the lovable and talented Zach Braff,
who reminds us that a sitcom doesn't have to make you laugh.
You can try to deny it, but we can certify it. If you want it, you can find it on TV. CBS was once a network that was reverent and clean, but today they've got some shows that are remarkably obscene.
Like the show about a little boy who lives with Charlie Sheen.
Oh, there ain't nothing to it. You click it on and view it. If you want it, you can find it on TV. ABC has got a lineup that's refreshing and alive, with its hits like Desperate Housewives just continuing to thrive.
And those women look sensational for being 65.
No, we won't oversell ya. We merely want to tell ya, if you want it, you can find it on TV. Now, The Sopranos is a show I'd recommend,
because you never know just how it's gonna.
So to sum up the philosophy on which we're both agreed, all the garbage on the airwaves is a vital thing indeed.
Cause without it, then Americans would have to learn to read.
And so up with the curtain, it's absolutely certain, if you want